question for the day. How do we define and experience God? This is part 3. So we're building off of what we just went into. You're going to need to listen to at least part 2 to understand this, because in part 2, we looked at the definition of God through the lens of him being the strong authority. So we went back and we looked at Aleph and Lamed as a review. Aleph is a vision of an ox, an image of an ox, and Lamed is a staff. Ox is strong and represents strength, and the staff represents authority, the strong authority. God is the strong authority. At the very end, we went over a verse from Doctrine and Covenants that said that an authority, what makes an authority is it decides what is good and what is not good. And that can be defined in the term of a law. God is the lawgiver. That which is the lawgiver in your realm of experience, in your world, is equivalent to your God. So even those who profess not to believe in God, or I mean, it's okay if they say they don't believe in a particular God. I don't believe in Zeus, and some may say they do not believe in Elohim and Jehovah, that's what they're communicating. But you cannot get out of the existential problem that there is a God structure psychologically, and that you are going to have that which is your strongest authority, your highest authority in your world and in your perceptions and in your actions is equivalent to your God. That which you desire most is your God. That which you value most, that which you are most loyal to and trust most is equivalent to God. Now, what we want to look at a little bit closer is this idea of the should. Now, when I have students that are with me and we go over some of the principles of psychotherapy, and we have to kind of go over the existential components and some of the philosophy that undergirds psychotherapy, I point out the difference between a scientist and a priest. And I say, as soon as people use this magic word, they are no longer scientists. They are not scientists. They are priests. And the word is should. Scientist is not about the word should. The word should is not exist in the scientific vocabulary. And this idea is actually emboldened from a philosopher named Hume, who was actually a very anti-Christian individual, kind of more the atheistic type. He said that one cannot extract an ought from an is. Now, I don't use the word ought very much, but I use the word should quite often. And that's synonymous with the idea conceptually as an ought. So you could say that this is equivalent to one cannot extract a should from an is. Just because we have the world of facts, this material world, there is this, they call it Hume's guillotine. You cannot pass through just taking something that exists material to get into the world of values. And the world of values, this is where it's really interesting. What are our values? Values are shoulds. They are things that say you should do this. So phenomenologically speaking, phenomenology just means the world of experience, the study of phenomena, the things that we experience as human beings. We encounter shoulds. Even people who aren't religious are always throwing out shoulds all of the time. You can't escape it. I'm not being hypercritical of that. I'm just pointing out that shoulds exist. We're all suggesting that things ought to be something different. And it's philosophically, it's very strange when people say that. Why should anything ought to be anything else? Because one cannot extract an ought from an is. It's interesting that this Hume's guillotine has actually had to turn and cut more of the atheistic religions down to size, because they keep continuing to say that, no, this is how things ought to be. Well, how do you get there if you're claiming there isn't a God? If there isn't a God, you can't extract oughts from the is. If all that exists is a material world, you don't get to have values. And psychologically, the consequence of not having values is extraordinary. I put in the bottom corner here, there's a TED Talk, and it says, science can answer moral questions. And I listened to this. This is from, I don't know if he is a self-proclaimed world-leading atheist. He is one that does have a lot of traction. So I think he's more than just a self-proclaimed. He is one of the world-leading atheists. And it's interesting, I listened to the TED Talk, and it's science can answer moral questions. His whole idea is addressing the ought is problem. And he says, no, science can answer moral questions. And if you listen to the whole thing, you're welcome to do it. He at no point gives any legitimate argument that says science can do this, other than the fact that he just says, no, science can. Trust me, it can. I am a strong, I am a strong authority. You can trust it on my authority that we can. There's no data-driven argument. If you listen to it, you'll find that Hume's guillotine actually does quite remain in effect. He does appeal to our human nature. He appeals to something within us, as if we had a spirit or a soul, if there was a conscience, a spirit, a divine light that exists within us that does help us discern from right and wrong. And he does appeal to that to say, like, no, there is something that lets us do that. But he's breaking a lot of, I'd say, genuine scientific laws as he gets to that point, which I'm glad that there is still a recognition that there is something in us, even from one of the most ardent atheists. He is pointing to the idea that there is something in us that really does help us, even if he's doing that somewhat inadvertently, that helps us establish what we should do. So, should implies good. Should implies value. It implies something that you're aiming at. And that will all make sense when you listen to the one before this, number 2, and the second version of how do we define God, because God manifests in our highest aims. What I'm moving to here is when we use the word should, anytime you hear the word should, this should really open your eyes, because shoulds are thrown out all the time. The word should implies, it's an authoritative statement. Strong authority. God is the strong authority. That which really can proclaim what we should do is God. And if we put ourselves in that position, then we are putting ourselves into the position and throne of God. So let's skip past that. We're not going to play through that. I like this. This comes from Jordan Peterson. This is from his book, Maps of Meaning. This is again, I would say this is an existential map within the human experience. We always have what is in our phenomena and the phenomenological field. There's always what is the present. But because of the odd conscious state that we have found ourselves in within our human experience, we're also always encountering what should be. And this could be determined as the ideal future, what we are aiming at. Aristotle, right? You can see the arrows. There's a imagistic aim. We are always in the state of what is, and we're always also consciously viewing and sometimes subconsciously viewing and aiming at what should be. And then we have the plans of how do we get there. So this is really interesting, because I believe that this is a existential framework. Existential meaning all human beings have a should and an aim that they're aiming at, which is really cool when you look at this through the lens of the idea that this life is a test. It means that built into the structure of all humanity's existence is an interaction with what should be. And we have a moral agency where we get to examine multiple shoulds and values and aims, and as we encounter them, and we are forced within the human condition to act towards something, because in as much as we act, and even neutrality itself is impossible, because the neutrality moves in a direction which has consequences. So it's going to force us. The essential idea is that life has forced our hands to act, and our acts are going to manifest values and aims, and those values and aims, they are equivalent to the notion of God, especially if we are looking at this through the context of that which is our highest aim. Some people, their highest aim is death. I want to die. Suicide. I want the world to end. People can aim at some very corrupt things. And if that's what you're aiming at, and you feel like that is what should be, and that is your ideal future, that becomes, in essence, God in one of God's most fundamental roles. God, the problem we use God a lot of times to try to define God is God gets defined so many ways, because God he's everything. He's the omnipotent, the omnipresent, the omniscient. And so God does end up in a lot of categories. The reason we're focusing on these ones and utilizing the Hebrew definitions is to say that these might be some of the most fundamental. And they truly are fundamental, if only from a psychological perspective, as well as a phenomenological perspective. Because if we just look at this essential fundamental map, which all human beings have, we are always engaging with a future, and we're aiming at a future. And that future, the most ideal aim, the highest aimed future that you can aim at, is equivalent to God, the strong authority in that sense. And if you shall say there is no law, you shall say there is no sin. And if you say there is no sin, you shall also say there is no righteousness. To proclaim that there is no sin is to proclaim that to be the good and the aim and the law itself. Saying there is no sin is to establish that and write that as a law. And that is to put yourself, if we go back to that Ezekiel verse that we went over in verse 2, to put yourself in the throne of God. But if then, comes from the Brothers Karamazov. The Brothers Karamazov is a writing from Dostoevsky, which a lot of these writings are in response to the nihilistic beliefs coming from Nietzsche. And nihilism suggests that there is no God. And if you shall say there is no law, which God is the strong authority. So if there is no strong authority, then you also say there is no sin. And if there is no sin, then everything is permissible. That's what we get this. It's just a logical, another way of explaining what we have from 2nd Nephi. So Dostoevsky's words, but then if he, God, does not exist, man is the chief of the earth, of the universe. He is free. He becomes God, and everything is permissible to him. You can see this, how this category structure, it's manifest. We have Aristotle getting at this. We have Dostoevsky getting at this. Multiple philosophers coming in congruence, identifying that there is something just innate within our human experience, that which establishes law is, in effect, your God. And if we say truly there is actually no God, if man is God, well, there's no authority. There's no genuine authority in man. So truly there is no sin, and everything becomes permissible. Back to that verse in Ezekiel, I referenced it earlier, but we'll read it with its more pure form and accuracy. Thus saith the Lord God, because thine heart is lifted up, and thou hast said, I am God, I sit in the seat of God in the midst of the seas, yet thou art a man and not God, though thou set thine heart as the heart of God. To put yourself in the position of the lawmaker makes you become the law unto itself and the lawgiver unto himself, and usurp the throne of God. I find this really, really helpful, again, bringing this back into something of a piece of relevance. I mean, it's relevant because I think it does provide some accuracy to this world and helping to understand other people, that as soon as we live in this, as soon as people start to express a world of value and a world of shoulds, you can understand that they are in this priestly spiritual domain. This really arrived on me a lot. I'm going to use maybe a controversial example, but during COVID, where it was very odd to me to see these very bold medical recommendations. Trust the science. This is what science says. This is what science says we should do. I'm like, no, guys. Science does not say what we should do. God, priests, spirituality says what you should do. That's law, that's aim, that's good. The whole premise of science is to just say, let's try to look at things in the most objective form and extract all values. We want to look at things from a valueless perspective. So I hope this is helpful if only to understand the framework of this life, to understand that God has built into the very psychological, experiential framework of all human beings to provide this life to be a way where we can manifest our true aims. And hopefully, very hopefully, we are putting God as the true strong authority, the highest aim in our life, and putting him as the highest should, is right, the lawgiver that can allow us to, the lawgiver that can express what we should do our lives, and may we all follow through with that which is manifested of God that we should do.